This is Lucinda, and just before we get going with this week's episode, I wanted to talk about Third Sector, the conference. Our conference this year will be a 2-day event taking place on the 18th and 19th of June in London. We'll have multiple streams running on each day, so you'll be able to take your pick from some of the leading voices in fundraising, finance, tech, and leadership. And the good news is that our early bird deadline has just been extended. So if you buy your ticket before the 21st of February, you'll save £200 on the full rate. We look forward to seeing you there.
Hello and welcome to the Third Sector podcast. I'm Dami Adewale.
And I'm Lucinda Rouse. Each week we bring you half an hour of discussion and debate about the important goings-on in the charity world. This week we'll be learning about corporate advisory boards, finding out what their purpose is and how they fit into more established governance structures such as trustee boards. Save the Children is among a handful of charities to have recently created a corporate advisory board. Their board came into being about a year ago, and we're delighted to be joined in the studio by two people who have been heavily involved from the beginning.
First up is Tamsyn Hanrahan, who is Director of Partnerships and Philanthropy at Save the Children. Hi, Tam.
Hi, Dami, and hi, Lucinda. Great to meet you.
Great to have you with us. And also with us is Beth Knight, Social Sustainability Director at Lloyds Banking Group and Chair of Save the Children's Corporate Advisory Board. Hello, Beth.
Hi, thank you for having me with you.
Now, on your website, it says that Save the Children's Corporate Advisory Board exists to accelerate the charity's impact for children through the development of sector-leading transformational partnerships and advising the organisation on best-in-class solutions that can make the charity more effective in meeting your goals. I'd like to use those stated aims as a starting point for this discussion, and we'll go into the history and some of the practicalities a little bit later. But Tamsyn, transformational partnerships versus solutions to making the charity more effective sounds like they could be quite disparate functions, certainly very broad. Is that correct, or has the board's work so far in the past year been centred very much around the corporate partnership function?
They definitely have not felt too disparate. I mean, when I look back now, over the first year of having the board in place, it's really clear that it has been such a rich value exchange for the members of the board and for us in the corporate partnerships team in terms of strengthening our impact for children. And I guess to sort of dig into what we mean by those two stated aims, one of the things that we are looking to achieve with the support and the advice of our advisory board members is for them to help us really sharpen our pitch and the way that we speak to and engage with businesses, because we have a number of really transformational partnerships already with the private sector, and we want to continue to deepen those and we want to bring on more. So it's a bit about being critical friends and helping us really think hard about the propositions that work. And then the other area is really around how we can use the networks and the connections of those board members to sort of start to actually practically develop some of those outreach to organisations.
Would you be able to give an example of a way in which the board has influenced or been involved with perhaps an existing corporate partnership that you've had going for a few years?
When we've discussed that the value that the board can really add, actually, if it's not broke, then we don't need to fix it. And I think one of the nice things about how I've learned about, say, the children's management of their partnerships is that the existing partnerships are all working really well. So whilst we've been there and privy to the occasional event or strengthening some of those partnerships, that isn't really where we've been needed. I think from an operational perspective, we've had conversations around use of technology, development of communications, kind of sharpening of things like pitch packs when you're talking to partners about new projects. Part of that value add that we've had is exploring, well, what's shifting from a corporate perspective around how different organisations are thinking about their philanthropy or their social impact work, and where are there opportunities for Save the Children to really kind of force multiply together with those organisations.
So let's take a step back. Could you tell us about the process and the decision making that led to you establishing a corporate board about a year ago?
This is something that we had thought about for quite a few years. As you said at the start, there are a few organisations that have similar boards, and I always felt it was something that could really add value to our approach. But I also recognise that if we were going to do it, we wanted to do it really thoroughly and competently at the beginning, and that would therefore need a decent investment of our time and energy. There came a point in 2023 when we were in a really good position as a team. There'd been some really great progress. We were in a relatively stable place and we had the resources to sort of commit to it. And it was at that point actually that we approached Beth and spoke to her about becoming a chair of the board, because we really wanted to work hand in hand with the chair to think about how we shaped it beyond some of the initial thinking that we had done.
For me, it wasn't years of thinking. It was it was an approach and probably a series of 2 to 3 conversations. So when I started talking to Save the Children about this idea and concept, I was working at Amazon. I was head of community investment there for Europe. And Save the Children was one of our established corporate partners there. We'd been working with them on our response to the Ukraine war, so lots of disaster relief activity at the time. I had seen and understood shifts and changes both in the funding streams within the third sector, but also how corporates were engaging and thinking about relationships with organisations like the Save the Children Partnership, both from a crisis response lens, but also kind of more strategic multi-year relationships. I loved the idea and the concept. I didn't jump at it straight away, and part of that was because I had a day job. It's a big commitment to become a board chair. It's very nascent and new as a concept, so we knew that we would have to really think about the governance thoughtfully, recruit the right board members, etc. And it took a lot of time. I think I was quite fortunate that when we started talking about it, I had decided to take a step away from my work at Amazon, and I knew that I would have a period of a couple of months before I started my next commercial role. And so having those 3-4 months where I could give a couple of days a week, really, working hand in hand with Tam and her team to design what it looked like. There was nothing really on the open market that we could draw from. So we really did have to whiteboard, think about the governance, write terms of reference, really critique it and go out and consult with people. And once we designed it and got the kind of bones of it up and running, then thinking about, well, what's the right blend of representation from a corporate perspective on a board like this? Should it be from existing partners? Should it be people that have a long relationship with Save the Children or a new? What does that look like? And just giving ourselves permission to experiment for a year or two and bed it down and test that the value was there.
Practically speaking, could you tell me how the board works currently?
Yeah, so we've got a terms of reference. So each board member has to commit to that in terms of advice that they'll provide, guardrails on time that they'll give. We say that we'll get together in person twice a year, for example, and then we have kind of offline check-ins. We also created annual goals. So we did a big half-day workshop when we first kicked off the board. We sat down, we brainstormed 10 goals, I think it was, maybe 8. Then we said, well, this is too much. Let's focus down. And we agreed 8 that were very tangible, quantifiable. We then split into groups of 2 within the board. So we had a leader per goal area. And so it gave us the ability to come together as a board and have a kind of plan for that first year. But also we weren't dependent on deep consultation and needing to get together in meetings, because each goal area had a distinct owner and we could sort of divide and conquer between us. And what we realised over time is that based on the sort of ebbs and flows of the corporate members' day job and work life, we would have a fast acceleration on a goal and then a slowdown, and then it became extremely flexible, and that worked really well. We also invested a bit of time getting to know one another as board members, so we felt comfortable about picking up the phone to one another. We have a WhatsApp group where we kind of exchange ideas and pictures and messages. We have a secretariat in Tam's team. So at the moment, it's a lovely woman called Marta who keeps us on plan. She gets to kind of crack the whip. And from my perspective, it's been an absolute joy, really, from day one. And I think giving ourselves sort of that permission and point of accountability to interact together as a board has been working really well. Now, we're all very experienced executives, so there's also been sort of elements of forgiveness when day job has taken us away from board activities, and other individuals have sort of stepped up to plug gaps because we're working well together as a true board and team.
So how many of you are there in total?
At the moment, there's 7 of us, is that right?
You plus 7, so 8 in total.
Okay, yeah.
And how long do you anticipate that people would be a member of this board?
So when we launched it, we gave ourselves a 2-year term, which is quite short. Normally you do 3 or 5 years. It was really because it was an experiment and we didn't want people to kind of feel like it was a burden or to overcommit people. A year in, at least for myself, I think it's fine to say a 3 to 5 year is manageable, and I think other board members would agree. But essentially, on day one, we all committed to 2 years. We'll evaluate at that 2-year mark and decide as a group if we want to sustain, if people want to step out. There's other structures within Save the Children as well. So it might be that board members decide to go and do a different piece of work, for example, with the Women's Network, or if work takes them abroad, they might spend time with a different part of Save the Children in another country.
And Tam, I wanted to ask you about the overlap with other boards and other committees, or whatever you want to call it, within the charity. And I'm thinking specifically about the trustee board. Presumably that's something that needed to be taken into consideration at the point of coming up with the idea. And was there any concern that there might be overlap with the trustee function that needed to be taken into account?
You're right that we spoke in some detail with our company secretary at the start of the process to explain what we were trying to achieve with the corporate advisory board. I wouldn't say there was any concern. In fact, I know there wasn't any concern. I do remember having a discussion about titles because there's sort of some legality about what certain people's expectations are. But we've always been very clear, and internally we understand this, that our board of trustees has a very wide remit. They are there obviously to sort of set the strategy for the organisation, to manage the finances, to do a very important role around governance. And we also appoint different trustees with specific skill sets in various areas. Fundraising obviously is also part of that broad remit, but it's one of many things. And this corporate advisory board has a more focused goal and remit around fundraising, if you want to call it that, but really relationship and partnership building and with the private sector. We've made the connections between people in a couple of instances. We want to do more, certainly, to demonstrate to the Board of Trustees more of what we're doing as a corporate advisory board, and vice versa, to bring the corporate advisory board members closer to the trustees. Because I know that the motivation for a number of the members of our board was they want to do more in their roles in the future. A lot of them are interested in sort of their purpose, and therefore, becoming a trustee in the future is something that they were interested in.
With a year of experience, I was just wondering, where has the board proven most useful in terms of achieving the charity's goals?
There have been a couple of very important and impactful pre-pitch sessions that we've done when we've been having a big meeting with a private sector organisation, and we want to make sure that we have got the tightest, most brilliant pitch. We've brought together a few members of the board, and this is where they've been excellent. They've been responsive, and we've been able to get people together within a relatively short period of time. And so their feedback in terms of how we've taken those pitches forward has been invaluable, and I'm delighted to say that, in a couple of occasions we've been successful, and I know that it is down to the advice and insight that they've given us. And then there's also been, as I say, it's slightly harder to quantify, but more general, regular, critical friend feedback around the way we talk about our work, the way we're positioning ourselves. Even when we're starting to think about new propositions, there was something, for example, that we were considering last year, and I sent an early stage version of it to the board, and there was some really useful feedback broadly along the lines of, I'm still not clear exactly what you're getting at here. We sometimes can get too internal. I think we all recognise this. And so having trusted people who understand your organisation, but also who you're trying to talk to, is really, really appreciated.
And how about any learnings or anything that you anticipated the board would really be able to support on and perhaps hasn't fulfilled that function in the way that you would have expected?
We at Save the Children are a large and complex organisation working in many countries, working across many different types of work. And I think for those board members who haven't worked with organisations like us, or indeed with any charity, I think getting to grips with the breadth of our organisation, with the way we're governed, with the different types of funding, with what is or isn't feasible, it was probably greater than I expected. And I suspect we're probably still on that journey with some people. I mean, when I started at Save the Children, it certainly took me many months, if not sometimes years, to understand the full breadth of it. So I think that's definitely a realization that you don't want to bombard everybody at the beginning. You know, it's like revealing and sharing useful information at the right time.
Yeah, I think for me, it's been like working across cultures almost, because the way that Save the Children would articulate the impact of their work, or even the words and the language that they use to come and explain what they're trying to do and trying to achieve. I think the example Tam just gave, where members of the board have had to say, but what do you mean? Like, really, can you simplify it down? Can we get the Save the Children language and the business language closer to one another so that we're both meaning the same thing and there's nothing getting lost in translation around that communication? And we all speak English, and yet at times at cross purposes, right? And so that's been fascinating to see. So there's been that learning curve. We still have a lot of untapped potential in the board, I would say, and we talk about this a lot. So in focusing down on 6 priorities, that helps us, you know, it's the sharpening of the arrow around what we want to achieve. But there is a lot of expertise around tech, finance, that sort of thing, media and campaign work, etc., that is on the table. And I think the wisdom and the expertise that comes from Tam and the partnership team is also connecting us out and back into those wider parts of Save the Children to make sure that that expertise is there and can be used to best effect.
But then also looking at it on the flip side as well, talking about making sure you're speaking the same language and understand where both sides are getting at. I can imagine that you are a critical function, particularly in this early setup stage, in terms of helping Save the Children and Tam and the team to identify who or what roles within the private sector would be able to offer what it is that you need from a charity perspective.
Absolutely. And one of the helpful things about getting that governance and objectives and goals right is that where the Save the Children team are living and breathing their day jobs, day in, day out, there's been the odd moment where they've come and said, oh, we'd like to talk about this at the board. Can we do the following things? And I've been like, yes, great, we absolutely can. But I also think my role as chair is to hold us to the mission that we have for the board, and to be really clear of the trade-offs. You know, if you have a finite amount of time to access this group of executives, is that highest and best use of their time? That's enabled us to keep a really tight board cadence and meeting focus, whilst at the same time we found this optional kind of, let's have a separate session. If anyone's free for an hour, jump in, riff on an idea, give us your kind of brain and muscle around particular things. And that's worked really well, because we've been able to get a balance of, is the board doing what it should? Plus, opportunistically, if there's something really timely that Tam or her team have needed, different kind of combinations of us have been able to give time to help on those things.
And Beth, you mentioned that the board has a lot of untapped potential, and we spoke about the learnings just a minute ago. So I was just wondering, just in terms of this next year, how are you looking to tap into the untapped potential of the board and achieve your goals for the next year?
So we're at that stage of looking back on what we achieved in the first year and then setting our goals for next year. Some of those goals will sustain. So, for example, we had a goal around unrestricted funding. We achieved part of the way to that. I think we got to about 50 to 60% of the goal we set ourselves. And we intentionally said, let's set a really stretching goal and then we'll forgive ourselves if we don't hit it. But trying to think about different funding mechanisms for unrestricted funding for sure has been a big one. And I think we can do more on that. Part of the reason we didn't move as quickly on that is the learning curve that Tam alluded to. We needed to spend a bit more time to help those board members that have been in, you know, exclusively commercial roles really understand how to bridge that philanthropy environment. And that's taken some time, and that will sustain into next year. Where we've found really useful opportunities on partner development or thinking about use of technology, etc., I imagine we'll do more and more of the same on those things. And then each board member are on their own kind of personal journeys with Save the Children and what they want to do, give and offer. And so having that freedom as individuals to explore different parts of Save the Children's mission has been wonderful. I mean, I can talk to myself in that context. I had the opportunity to go to Kenya in November, and I spent a week with Tam actually just learning more about the field work, and that really motivated me. It helped me to kind of see and engage in a way that an advertising campaign or a report doesn't quite get you that same level of insight. So that was extremely powerful.
And how about before you've engaged your new board member and given them the opportunity to have a look at your operations and even make a trip to Kenya? How can you make your pitch compelling to somebody in a senior corporate role? I know obviously motivations will vary according to who the person is, but is there any advice that either of you could offer in terms of how can you make this a really compelling offer?
That's a really interesting question, and perhaps it's a reflection of the brand and recognition of Save the Children. But when we put our job description out there, and we did a very thorough recruitment process, we put it out on a number of job boards, we promoted it through a huge amount of our personal and professional networks. We had a huge number of applicants that we screened, and then we went through an interview process with them. We've been in the very lucky position where we had people who were genuinely interested. And as I say, I think there's many impressive people out there who want to find ways to give back in their roles. That said, if I was talking to any organisation, there's such value that comes from bringing together people who, as I say, share a passion for the organisation. That's really key. You know, caring about our mission for child rights was at the heart of what motivated our board members to join us. So bringing together those people has been really important. People feeling, as I said, that they are giving something back, that their knowledge and experience is being valued and used. It's great professional development if you wanted to then move on to a trustee role in any organisation, because you're starting to understand how they work. And I also think that the social element of it has been probably something that I hadn't anticipated, but the members, you know, through excellent recruitment on our part, but they've really gelled incredibly well. And we've had a couple of social meetups, and that's really valuable to them as well. You know, we all want to work with people that we feel inspired by and get on with, don't we?
A big part of the kind of mandate that we set out with the board was to have fun, you know, to have fun together, to enjoy it, to bring joy into how we engage with Save the Children. That's been the style of the meetings even, you know, finding those opportunities to laugh together, come up with creative ideas together, listen to one another, have proper facilitated conversations and dialogue together. And it's created a really lovely sense of kind of collegiate support, which I hope sustains. When you start something new, there's always that kind of push and burst of energy and enthusiasm. So the test now becomes, let's sustain that into year 2. And if any of the board members are listening to this, that's a direct challenge to us to keep that up. But yeah.
Keep the momentum going.
Exactly, yes. Yeah.
Now you've had this board in place for a year. You've been in post for longer than that. Can you look back to what it was like before the board was there, and like what were the nature of your interactions with people in the private sector who you wanted advice from, not necessarily in a formal partnership? Like, did you have lots more ad hoc interactions as a team that perhaps you don't now?
Yeah, and I think that speaks slightly to one of the questions that any organisations listening to this will want to consider, is whether you need and want a board to fulfil your aims, or whether there are different ways of accessing sort of the supporters to your cause, you know, that may already connect with you in different ways. Because certainly we've got supporters across many areas of our business, you know, who work with us in sort of slightly more informal ways, and we could, you know, sometimes tap into them. What I would say is the big change now, though, with the CAB, and hopefully you're picking it up from the way we're talking about it, is that there is that real collective sense of wanting to drive things forward. And there is that strong understanding of how we want to partner with business to drive impact. And so there's that willingness to sort of support, to be there, and to be relatively flexible in terms of the things we may need to ask. It means that we can just fast track as well some of the background. Those are some of the things that have certainly made it easier, and that I see as a difference between now and a couple of years ago, when we probably had a few more individuals that we would speak to about particular questions, but now it's really much more collective.
If I can jump in on that as well. So I would have been one of those individuals that would be occasionally reached out to for a bit of advice or to look at something, etc. And I think the noticeable difference from me of being an executive who cares about the organisation, is supportive of it. My journey with Save the Children's been over a decade of my professional life, to being in a board capacity. It's a sense that I truly understand the DNA of the organisation. I feel like a trusted partner, a sense of responsibility. And even if in 5 years' time, I'm no longer chairing the board and I'm off doing other things, this experience is something that will stay with me. It's been incredibly rewarding and beyond what I would have done on an ad hoc basis. So there's that difference. I will respond to an email within a day, whereas before I might have been like, yep, care about that, I'll get to that on Friday. It changes your kind of rhythm of relationship with the organisation for sure.
So as a final question for you, for anybody listening to this working for another charity who are considering setting up a corporate advisory board of their own, what would your tips to them be?
So I would certainly take that time at the beginning to think with trusted colleagues internally about what you want to achieve with that board, and if there may be other groups or individuals or ways you can achieve those aims with what you have. Because the corporate advisory board has been invaluable for us, but you want to go into it knowing that clearly and being ready to invest the right kind of level of people and time and energy into it. And then I think it's so important to do the broadest recruitment that you can so that you get a very diverse set of people, and working really closely with a trusted chair at the beginning is invaluable as well.
And as that trusted chair, Beth, is there anything that you would add to that?
I'd had experience working with boards in a public and a commercial capacity prior to becoming the board chair of Save the Children. So I brought some of that experience into the setup and the design, and I think that helped us. I think having somebody who's bought into the mission, who has a tenure of relationship with the organisation and can also bring some of that governance knowledge and oversight is extremely helpful. I don't know whether that made me a unicorn option as the chair or not, but if you can find that combination of skills in your chair, I think that's incredibly helpful. It's a kind of critical part of that recipe of getting it right.
Beth, Tam, thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Welcome.
We hope you enjoyed our discussion with Tam and Beth, and that's it for this week. Next time, we'll be speaking to the head of the New Economics Foundation, Dami Sriskandaraja. If you'd like to get in touch with suggestions for podcast episodes or guests later in the year, you can find my contact details in the show notes to this episode, and I'd love to hear from you. Our producer is Nav Pal.